just the epitome of evil. That his heart, he was just evil through and through. There was a blackness, the very depth of evil that connected to hell itself. And I believe that he could be embodied and instructed by Satan through Satan's intelligence, linking up to him as using and doing the program. And just like God designed man to be inhabited by God and himself, Joseph Mengele emulated the exact opposite of that, where he could be totally inhabited and controlled by Satan himself in the ingeniousness of the programming, and to link a corporate web. I believe that Satan used him to do the very structures, the very basics of the programming in linking and setting the foundation of the Nephilim project as well. His main way that he would do that would be through bringing people to death, and many, many, many times bringing them into death, and also bringing them out of life. He had the latest equipment that was given to him by the kings of the earth. They subsidized it, and they hired him to do this programming, to do all these experiments. You know, a lot of the technology that we see today, I believe the technology was there in the 50s when he was programming me. And the main thing that he calculated just the point of when to bring me into the death and when to bring me out. And so there were many, many, many instances of doing that, and that's how he would link then the demonic entities and create the network and create the web. And so that was my primary memory of him. I spent about 6 months with him, with him putting the kind of a final touch, per se, on the programming after Bowlby and the attachments and things of that nature. And but I believe the very basis was to create the new bloodline, to create not just the Aryan race. You know, that was the German nomenclature, per se, was really to create a new race of the Nephilim. And that's what I believe that was his primary purpose.
Yeah, and I think, too, for those that are listening, when we talk about death, I mean, if you read Mengele and how he worked and practiced on the twins and, of course, dwarfs and those who are mentally retarded, he killed thousands of people in the process. But he would do all kinds of experiments, which I will not go into. But one was to, just like you say, bring them to a point of death, and even into death, and resuscitate. We know clinically that there's about a 4-minute window that if a person is put to death, that they have to be resuscitated before brain damage sets in. Of course, he knew all that, and of course, during that death, from what I understand and working with you, that's when there would be rituals that would be going on, and they would be channeling in spirits during this time. During that period of death, it creates a dimensional opening so that a part of your identity is actually can be interfaced and projected dimensionally into a global structure, as you refer to it, as a matrix. In fact, Isaiah 25, verse 7, it's referred to as where God says, "Upon this mountain, Mount Zion, I will swallow up the veil, the face of the covering that is over all the nations, the veil or the web that is woven over all the peoples." And so that's a real phenomenon, and it's Satan has constructed this and anchored it there on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. But you also understand that if you cool a person's body down to, just to the point where they, as low as they can possibly cool the body down, you can extend the death window before you resuscitate them back. And so he knew all this. He learned all these techniques in Auschwitz. And of course, when he was released, I say released, when the war was over, and of course, he was there in Germany for a while, and then he finally had to escape to Argentina because they were hunting for him. He of course, has been in the United States. We'll touch on that a little bit later about the reports that he was never in the United States, which is a lot of hot air. It's never ridiculous. But it's important to recognize that he was not only a doctor who was pursuing what he believed in his ideology, that which would advance the German eugenics cause and create a new species of humanity, which we know is the modern-day Nephilim, but he would not have called it that. That during this process, he was not only a doctor, but he was a world-class sorcerer, like Balaam in his day. And so that during the trauma, then there would be channeling in of spirits. And here's what people need to understand. The internal structuring of the DID is that human beings can be used to implement various types of trauma, electroshock and sensory deprivation, and all kinds of ways of bringing horrific abuse to the body, hot and cold, and every kind of conflicting kind of experience. The human beings can do that. But when the person goes into traumatic shock and dissociates, or ultimately into death, during that time, it's the principalities and powers that actually do the structuring. So when we talk about trauma-based programming, it's not human beings that are creating this internal kingdom of Satan and as a dissociative realm. All this highly sophisticated structuring and the various constructs that are in, this is all a demonic architecture, a type of spiritual engineering, if you will, to create a weapon to be used against God's purpose, used against the church, and of course used in various ways in various stratas of society. So, Sally, is there anything else you want to comment on that before we hand the phone to somebody else so they could maybe comment on their connection, just introductory to with Mengele? Anything else? Any other comments?
No, just to follow up that you had mentioned that bringing the people to the death. That one of his favorite things that he would do that came to my mind was drowning. And medically, we know that a person who has drowned, that we're taught to go ahead and resuscitate because, if they're submerged into cooler water, then they can sustain life a little bit longer. So he knew that, and that was what he would seem to do quite often, was through cold water drownings and things of that nature.
Okay. All right. So who's next?
Hi, Georgianne. This is Juliana.
Hi, Juliana.
One thing that, in regard to Mengele, to his experiment with twinning with the twins in Auschwitz, he learned to force the egg and to split, to force twinning. And the Lord showed me early on, when I starting to recover my dissociative memories, that I was conceived in a petri dish and that it was very, very crowded. There was at least 30 or more embryos splitting off of me, and they placed at least 3 or 4 embryos together in the womb, in different wombs, and then killed one in the womb, killed one at birth, and then brought the identical twins together for programming later after birth. So, and also I think he was involved in twinning of people who are not identical twins, programming them together so that they were identical in their programming and linked together through simultaneous deaths and things like that. But he was involved in my life from birth onward, and many different times. And what I remember of him, too, is, as like the other said, that he's just, it's like he was just fully demon-possessed. He was like, he would vacate and spirits were there, and he was just very evil. So that's what I remember.
Let me just comment on, you mentioned conception, you mentioned birth. It's really important that people who hear this, might ask the question, how could you know these things? We're not talking about memories. We're talking about the God of Daniel chapter 2, verse 22 is still alive and well. And if you'll remember in Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he went to the wise men and he said, I want you to tell me the dream and its interpretation. Well, nobody could do so. But when God finally revealed it, because it was a matter of life and death, Daniel praised the Lord, and he said to the Lord that the Lord knows profound and hidden things, and he knows what's in the darkness. And so you couple that together with the function of neshama, that is, not the human spirit, but it's an attribute of the inbreathed life of God, which occurs right at conception. When God formed Adam from the dust of the ground, he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. That's Genesis 2:7. That breath, that neshama, has attributes. And according to Job 30, I think it's in 31, I'll just look that up quickly so that it might relieve any of the those that may have a question, how can a person know? This is what we refer to as an epistemological question. It's a good question, actually. How can one know? First of all, I'll read Proverbs chapter 20, verse 27, since Julie made mention of what took place at conception, what took place at birth. And so in reading from Proverbs 20, verse 27, I'll read that. It's in the New American, the word is translated spirit. So often it'll be ruach. The Hebrew word ruach is translated spirit, and also the term neshama is translated spirit. They're related, but they're not exactly the same. In Proverbs 20, verse 27, it says, the spirit of man is the lamp of the Lord. Only in this case, it's not ruach, it's neshama. The neshama of man, that inbreathed life that comes only from God, with Adam at his creation, and with every human being at conception, not birth, at conception. The neshama of man, notice, is the lamp of Yahweh. The lamp of Yahweh. Notice its function, searching all the innermost parts of his being. Now, when does that begin? At the moment of conception. So as we turn to Job, we see a reference to the attributes of neshama. Elihu, who has been waiting to speak, as Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar have been harassing Job and trying to interpret his suffering as being rooted in some unconfessed sin, basically, and they were all wrong. Some of them had excellent theology. It just didn't apply to Job. And Elihu, who was younger and didn't have the history or experience, he waited until the three so-called friends of Job had finished their discourse, and then Job finished his discourse, and then Elihu speaks up. And he says in verse 6 of Job 32, Job 32:6, Elihu says, I am young in years and you are old, referring to, of course, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Therefore I was shy and afraid to tell you what I think. I thought age should speak, and increased years should teach wisdom. But it is a spirit in man, that's ruach, the spirit in man, and the breath, the neshama of the Almighty gives them understanding. Neshama gives them understanding. The Hebrew there is discernment, the ability to discriminate. So this is how people can know what happened to them. We don't know this if we don't have a trauma history. But when you're trying to help people and resolve people who have a history of trauma, then they have to know what happened to them in those areas where they're still held captive. I'll read one more verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, where it talks about God's wisdom being known to those who are wise, and that God has provided a special understanding and a knowledge of those